All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming. My name is Chelsea Lester. I'm the exhibition manager at Philadelphia's Magic Gardens, and I'm the curator of In Unison, ceramic sculptures by George Rodriguez, right here. So I'll tell you a little bit about the exhibition, and then George will walk us through both of the galleries and tell you a little bit more about the work. So just a little bit about George in this show. George is a ceramicist from El Paso, Texas, and he's currently based in Philadelphia. He's been creating beautiful ceramic works like these guardian, they're everywhere, so you'll see like these incredible guardian figures. He has a zodiac collection here and a beautiful throne in the back gallery. We're going to be going into the concepts of these works, so if you have any questions, you can either pop them out if you can't hold it, or you can wait till the end. We'll have a Q&A, and we'll all sit down in the back. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to George. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thank you all for coming. I'm excited to share a little bit about the background of these works and why I make some of the things that I make. And I first want to start by thanking Chelsea. It's been a pleasure to work with Chelsea the last, maybe a little over a year since we started conversations, just to figure out how the work was going to fit in the space and just Magic Gardens in general. First time I came to Philly and I saw the mosaics along the city, I was like, I first came to the clay studio in Old City, and there's a really beautiful mosaic in the staircase as you're heading up the clay studio, and I was really curious about who made it and why it was there, and then I started seeing it all around the town, and finally found Magic Gardens and Isaiah Zager and everything that the history behind that. And my work is, really about community, which I feel like Magic Garden really embodies, and also a lot of decoration and ornamentation, which I feel like Magic Gardens also embodies. So I'm really excited and happy to be showing specifically in this space here. We can keep it pretty casual. I'll tell you a little bit about the works. If you have questions, about any of the concepts or making or any of that, we can just address them, and we'll just kind of go along. These first two pieces, which is one cohesive work, is Los Guardias, so the Guardians. And for me, the idea behind these two works was I wanted to make these two guardian figures that protect us not only in this world, but also in our afterlife. They kind of call on our ancestors, and we are protected and guarded here in this space together, but also as we begin to transition. So the luchador figure kind of, for me, embodies this guardian figure that I grew up with, somebody that's a protector that could be good or evil, but they're always around to kind of to throw their body, throw their weight around a little bit. So this figure embodies our current life and our being now. And the Catrina figure is this kind of populist calavera skull figure that represents the common person, but also for me represents our afterlife. So La Catrina protects us as we move beyond. So it references our ancestors, but it also protects us as we move beyond. And sometimes I think about these, I always think of them as a pair, so they're different, but they're still very much equal, the two. They have the same size, same similar body stance, and kind of present it up high so we can really look them in the eyes a little bit more. The tiles in the background, I love to kind of play with just the ornamentation and trying to frame these figures, but the tiles were initially made as part of this larger project called Reflect and Gather. And Reflect and Gather was me creating a gathering space, which was this communal plaza that people could come in and just sit and talk and gather. And then I made 3 different rooms that were completely ornamented with these tiles, floor, walls, and ceiling. And then after you gather, you can go into one of these rooms and then reflect and talk, and not talk, but reflect and think about all the conversations that you just had with your gathering folk. And these were all made in part with the greater Seattle community. I made these all in my studio in Seattle. And I invited people to my studio, high school students, senior centers, art schools, just people from around to come in. I taught them how to make the tile, and then we all like glazed them and finished them together. And we ended up making about 6,000 tiles in total for the 2 different rooms. There's probably, is anybody good at math? There's 16 by 16 here. What is it? There you go, 256. Engineer? No? So I brought in overkill of boxes of tile because I wasn't sure, but we ended up kind of creating this composition. And every time I lay them out, it's a little bit different, but for me, I wanted this concentric circle. So there's 4 different tile designs in there, and they kind of come towards this middle space. But then there's 2 columns in the back that are a more dense tile decoration that for me are kind of the shadows of these 2 figures. So they hopefully draw you in, but they still have the figures behind them. So, should we move on? Does anybody have any questions specifically on this?
I actually did.
Yeah.
So the luchador, I mean, that's a mask. And so it suggests that there's a person under the mask. And this one looked like a Catarina, which is usually a skeleton. But it kind of looks like it's a mask of a skeleton on top of a person as well.
Yeah.
So, what's that? Like,
yeah.
Usually it's supposed to be, a skull, but in this case it looks like a mask of a skull.
Yeah, that's a great question. And typically when I've made skulls before, you'll see 3 smaller ones in the back, 3 calaveras, and they don't have the eyes behind. Maybe they do have the eyes. I can't remember. But usually, when I leave the eyes behind, it is this. I'm trying to preserve some of the humanity behind the work, so that it does feel like there's still a person. Because once you remove those, and it's just like a socket. I realize that when I want to connect with figures, I first start by looking. If I can see them in the face, I start by looking in the eyes and then move beyond. So I want to make that personal connection. Yeah, great question. Okay, let's we'll turn around. Those guardians are my personal work. That's the tiles we made as a community, but then the figures I kind of make myself with the help of my assistant Liz Wiegand, who helps me sometimes making all the ornamentation. But all of these, and so the Eco Familiar, all of these 12 animal heads were made in collaboration with 13 other artists that are Mexican or Chicane, so of Mexican descent. And each artist, so I kind of gave myself these parameters, right? The 12 animals are based on the Chinese zodiac, so the lunar calendar. So we're currently in the year of the rabbit right now. And I really love the story of the Chinese zodiac, so I thought, well, how can I bring that story closer to my home and closer to Mexico? So I chose parallel animals that live in or around Mexico. So instead of, it's funny that we're near the monkey, because the monkey is one of the 2 that kind of stayed the same, but instead of the snake, it would be an iguana. And so forth. Instead of a dragon, it would be a quetzalcoatl, which is a feathered serpent. And I can talk about those as we go along. But so I wanted to translate those 12 animals, and then I made a series that's just like my own series that looks and feels in the ornamentation that I like. The second one was colored in these really bright colors like alebrijes, which are these mythical wooden animals. The third one was all metallic, similar to the tiles behind the figures, so that they reference these Ai Weiwei sculptures that I kind of based my forms off of. The fourth were finished in a talavera type of finish, so it was like ornamentation but mostly drawn and not added. And then the fifth one, which is in front of you now, is this collaboration with these other 13 artists. And these artists are all different disciplines and medium artists. So, Gabriela Ramirez Mitchell is an artist from Jalisco. So, Gabriela is the only person who doesn't live in the States. She's actually based in Mexico. And whenever I approached each collaboration, there's 13 different people, so each collaboration was completely different. And I won't go too much into what they wrote. So they each wrote a statement, and we have it translated in English and Spanish. But they each kind of give their perspective, and I'll share a little bit more about our collaboration process and how we work together, because that's not something that is really stated in the writing. But Gabriela, we talked online. We emailed back and forth. Gabriela is actually one of the few people who I've never met in person, so we've never had like physical contact together. But we talked about, I sent them an image of La Mona and like what that was going to look like, and what she requested was that it had pierced ears, so I made some holes in the ears, and then there's a couple little holes on the back of the head for a name plaque to also go on, and then just to leave the raw clay fired, but with no color whatsoever. So I did that, packed it up, shipped it off to Mexico, and what Gabriela did is she's using this huichol technique where they put a wax substrate over the entire form. So there's like a kind of a sticky wax that goes on, and then all of the image is made with colored string. So that's placed above the wax and then just pressed in. So the wax is kind of holding, the wax is stuck to the clay, and then the string is stuck onto the wax. So potentially, if you start to pull a string, you could remove the image, and it would just start to come off.
What's that technique called? Is there a name for that?
I don't know the name. The huichol is the people, the indigenous people from Mexico that kind of use this as a decorative technique, and for making the sculptural works. But then they also made like some beautifully embroidered fabric work. But I don't know what the actual technique is called of that.
It sounds like there's got to be a name for it. Yeah.
I'm sure that she might even say what it is. She doesn't. But what she does say is like this. If you look at the image, there's like there's a peyote flower, there's an ear of corn, there's a blue deer, and all of those have like spiritual symbolism. So Gabriela kind of listed what all the symbols mean in the text. Okay, I'll keep moving on. We got 12 of these. Carolina Jimenez. Carolina is based out of Brooklyn, and Carolina is a weaver who makes these beautiful like textile forms that are like paintings but made out of fabric. And I met Carolina through a friend of a friend. So one of my really good friends told me that her sister was a weaver, and I really wanted to diversify the different type of artists that worked with each of these forms. So when one of the hardest part of the collaboration was just making sure that the artist was born the year of their animal. So like so Carolina had to be born the year of the blue deer, which is the year of the ram in the Chinese zodiac. So listed are all the birth years that you would fall under this animal. Because we don't get to choose an animal, we're kind of just like born into it. We get to choose like if we like it or not, but we're kind of stuck with our animal. Carolina really liked my sprigging technique. So the front of this is all clay. So like these forms are all clay, and she wanted to, and I kind of painted it in a way that mimicked fabric, and then she wanted to create her fabric additions in a way that mimicked the sprigs so that they would feel cohesive together. One of the things we talked about was leaving the ears open so that she could, like use it almost like a loom and create a woven pattern through that. And then the horns are just spun or tightly wound yarn, so there's no armature or anything. It's just yarn itself that's holding itself together. It's amazing. I don't know how she does it, but when she told me that, I'm like very impressed. And for this, I shipped. I made the piece in Seattle without any of the textile. I shipped it to myself here in Philadelphia, put it in the back of my Honda Fit, and then drove it to Brooklyn. And I just took it out of my trunk and like dropped it off at her house. Picked it up a few weeks later. So that was fun. Eric Garcia, I met in Chicago initially, and I met Eric at an art fair in Chicago. And Eric is an illustrator and political cartoonist based out of Minneapolis. Grew up in New Mexico, Albuquerque. So when I presented the prompt to Eric, Eric took it upon himself to really embrace his self-portraiture. So this piece is titled 1977, the year that he was born. And he is talking about himself, like his feelings as a Mexican American, and feeling, you know, like he's a colonizer, but also that he's been colonized. So he has all of this imagery on the iguana that kind of plays to that idea. He also requested that the dewlap, the bottom kind of waddly part, was in the shape of the U.S.-Mexico border. So you can kind of see that from like California to the Gulf of Mexico down in the bottom there. So we kind of worked mostly online to like create, you know, to figure out what the form was going to be. And he just wanted the raw clay, so I sent him the raw clay piece, which is the brownish tone, and he used green acrylic paint to bring the imagery to life. He and his wife, or his partner, had just had like a newborn, like 2-month-old. So he you know, wanted to, he wasn't able to travel to work on the piece. He wanted to just take his time to like work on it at home. Samira Steinmeier. Samira lives in Tucson, Arizona, and this was one of the last pieces that we that was kind of cemented in the collaboration. You know, I first started by asking friends of mine, and then after, you know, my friend group kind of filled in the spots, and I asked friends of friends, and I was looking for artists that I really admired. And Taco Mixel, which is the stand-in for the rabbit, which is we're in the year when Taco Mixel. For this one, I went onto Instagram and just said, like, was anybody born near the rabbit? I'm looking for collaboration. You know, I try not to do that because I was like, I didn't want to reject. The hardest part was saying to people is like, oh, I want to work with you, but I already have somebody for that year, right? Which I had to do a few times. But I went onto Instagram, and then there was 3 people that reached out to me that were born near the rabbit, and you know, we had conversations about, you know, how they might want to collaborate, and I tried to pick somebody who had a different skill set than maybe some of the other artists, or worked in a different medium. So Samira is a potter by trade, clay potter, so she knows how to work with clay really well. She mentioned to me that she hadn't made anything this large, but her living in Tucson and not being able to travel, what I ended up doing for the collaboration with Samira is I made a mold of the Taco Mixel head without any decoration. And then I created a PDF on how to use the mold. And I basically shipped her the mold and sent her the PDF so she could do it all herself. So I touched nothing of this piece. Like, I made nothing physically. She made the entire work herself. And what she wanted to do was take some of the clay and earth from around Tucson, which the Taco Mixel is actually found, inhabits the Sonoran Tucson desert. But she took some of that and kind of mixed it into her clay. So all the marbling and all the color is all like marbled clay, and she used that to press into the mold. And this was the second version. The first one, apparently, she didn't like the way the marbling came out in the patterning. So, and one of the things that I find really striking is like, it's so soft, and so, you know, like, if you really look close, you can see a lot of depth within that, and then the contrast of like the really glossy eyes pops so much. So this is Samira out of Tucson.
And the saguaros.
Yeah, in her back, like right in her backyard, she kind of lives around that. And one of the, you know, one of the lovely things about this project is that I've been able to become friends with these people. Samira, I didn't know, we just knew each other from Instagram, but now we call, like, she called me a clay buddy, and then she was like, can I call you a clay buddy? I'm like, of course, we're like clay. You know, she posts some really amazing images of just like the cactus and the wildlife in and around Tucson, because as you can tell, her pottery work features a lot of this kind of stone formation as the vessel forms, and it's pretty amazing. So. Shall we go to the next space? All right. Moises Salazar. Moises goes by they, them pronouns, and Moises is an artist based out of Chicago. Moises studied ceramic initially, but is now known for their amazing glitter and tufted fabric paintings, mostly addressing masculinity. So when they approached the Chapulín, they did some really great things. So they wanted to use glitter as one of the main components for painting. So when we talked, all they mentioned was that they wanted kind of a pink form to kind of as a starting base. So I made the Chapulín, and there's a few holes around the edges so that they could hang all of the tufting from. But so they made all the crocheted flowers and all the tufting and all the glitter. So when I unboxed this, when I received it back, because I shipped off some form as just this almost like a glitter bomb of brightness, and it was pretty phenomenal. And they titled the piece Grillettes. So a grillo is actually a cricket. So they're also playing with Chapulín and cricket, and the changing of identities in that regard, which I thought was super clever. John Gomez and Javier Barbosa. John Gomez and Javier I know from this fine arts camp in Alaska, so they're really good friends. They were some of the first people that kind of signed on to the project. And I asked them both at the same time. I didn't realize that they were the same age, so which made sense, but they were both interested, and we all know each other, so we made it a 3-person collaboration. So this is the only one that has 2 people working on it. John Gomez is a tattoo artist based out of Brooklyn. So when we were talking about the form, he wanted to include Chicano style tattoo imagery on the eagle. So there's a couple of rose patterns on the top of the head, which you can't see are these skulls. There's some webbing, there's some barbed wire around the edges. So really kind of playing on that Chicano motif. And Javier was initially, we were thinking about having a drawing behind it. Javier's an animator out of Los Angeles. And there was going to be a drawing that he kind of incorporated, but he was really interested in kind of AR technology, ultra reality technology. So we found a way where he could incorporate his animation by using an Instagram filter. So he figured out how to create a filter. Now it's getting easier to upload and manipulate that. But if you scan the QR code, it should take you, and if you scan the QR code and you have Instagram, it'll take you to a filter, and these wings come out and start kind of moving around the eagle. And he titled that piece Alas de Engañoso Destino Manifesto, Sangre y Aceite, which means the wings of manifest destiny, oil and blood. So these, again, talking about just being a Mexican artist here in the U.S. So these wings are kind of covered in oil and blood as they move around. Really beautiful, really gruesome, but I recommend you try that if you get a chance. Alejandra Carrillo Estrada. Ale is actually from El Paso, Texas, my hometown. But I met Ale here in Philadelphia for an ACC conference, for an American Craft Council conference. When I first moved here in 2019, I went to this conference, and we connected pretty instantly, and then found out we were from the same place. We're not that, we probably overlapped in undergrad at some point, but Ale is a jeweler. She actually teaches metals at University of Texas, El Paso, where I went to school. So when we were talking about this piece, she wanted to incorporate the chola aesthetic onto the work, which is this kind of hyper, very feminine, but hyper Chicano bandana, long eyeliner. So we talked about how the jaguar would hold that, and she wanted the other jaguars that I've made for this series all have their mouth closed, but she wanted to expose the teeth to make it fierce, and also to bring out the gold grill on the jaguar. So she made all of the. What we did for this collaboration is that I made a paper mache of the jaguar, sent it to her in El Paso. She did all the fitting of the earrings and the whiskers and the bandana. And then I made the form, and then she came to my studio in Seattle, and we did all of the placement of everything to make sure it all was working well. All of the metal is brass with gold plating, so she wanted it to have that kind of like brightness. And the earrings say Nepantla and Brava to kind of bring it back to the kind of a traditional Mexican language of Nahuatl, and kind of give it this like fierce, very empowered feeling. Okay. On the corner there is Josimar Reyes, who is a spoken word artist and poet out of San Jose, California. Josimar is actually another one of the artists, the only other artist that I haven't met in person. We've communicated a lot online. And I knew that I wanted a poet to be involved in this kind of visual arts project. I love poetry. I went into each collaboration thinking like, well, if I was a poet, this is what I would do. Mm-hmm. And of course, you're working with another person, so it doesn't, you have to collaborate. So with Josimar, what we did is he talked about kind of the concept of the Quetzalcoatl, which is in place of the dragon. The Quetzalcoatl is a feathered serpent, and it's a very powerful creature. And he thought about his grandmother and how long she's lived here in the States, and she's undocumented and what she had to go through. So he wanted to kind of empower her in the piece. So he wrote a poem and then had her recite it. So the recording that you hear is actually his grandmother reciting this poem for the first time. And then he engineered a couple of, audio engineered some like birds and other things in the background. But the poem and the piece is titled Guerrero, which means warrior in Spanish, but it's also the town that his grandmother grew up in Mexico. So she grew up in Guerrero, Mexico. Gustavo Martinez is a really close friend of mine. We went to the same school. We didn't overlap in graduate school, but I've known him for over a decade. So he was another one of the first people to sign in. And Gustavo is a very capable clay artist. He's a maker. He's also very spiritual. So when he was working on Cabra, Cabron, Cabrona, there's a couple things. There's like a play on word, cabra meaning the goat, and then cabron and cabrona is like when you're kind of like how would you say, like a hard ass or like a fucker. Yeah, so it's a play on that. So he wanted to bring that in. And then the goat, he wanted to kind of make it very earthbound. So he has that texture on the goatee that resembles kind of a rock structure, but also just kind of like grounds it in earth, and then sends it back into the spiritual realm with the third eye in the center, which is hard to see here, but there's kind of this third eye located there. There's a little bit of flocking, which is like a very small amount of fiber on the rocky parts, again to kind of give it more of a earthiness, been in the fire type of feeling.
What are the eyes?
The eyes are a golden metallic glaze with a black, with just like another black glaze over the top to kind of deepen the eyes so that they stand out from the balance of the rest of the form.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that piece is like, Gustavo was really about like energies and how we transfer energies to each other. So he came to my studio, him and John Gomez, who made the eagle. This was 2021. We actually flew into Seattle on January 6th, 2021, which was a crazy day to fly. But we potted together for about 12 days, 14 days, and we made these pieces. So we kind of just, went back and forth to my studio. And it was fun because we got to know each other more like really just through the making process. And he was in there just with his bandana and his cut-off shirt in winter, just like working away. It's great. Marilyn Montufar. Marilyn is a photographer, kind of splits her time between Seattle, New York, and LA. It's kind of all over the place. I met Marilyn first time in Seattle, and with this piece, Marilyn, we had a lot of discussions of like what we wanted to do, and Marilyn kept bringing different ideas. So, I kept trying to work with them. So this piece has a lot going on, but I think ultimately it all gels really, really well. So Marilyn's grandparents grew up in Ciudad Juarez, which is right across the border from El Paso, Texas. So we know kind of the same general area. I grew up in El Paso, but went to Juarez to see my extended family. So we wanted to bring the border wall into the center of the piece and kind of divide it into two. But we wanted to, follow the river a little bit more and not just have a direct line. So hence the movement of the middle wall. On one side is Ciudad Juarez and images from the Mexican side of the border, and then on the other side is El Paso, Texas, with images of that, which include a photograph on the back end of Marilyn's grandparents, and then a photograph of my mother as well. And then we also wanted to incorporate ourselves within the piece. So each of the irises, one is my eyeball, and then one is Marilyn's eyeball as well. So a little distorted. So then when we, so we had all the imagery laid out and wanted to make this kind of like a warrior type of feeling, hence the two lines across the, like underneath the eyes, which are these crosses. There's a lot of violence on the border, so those crosses represent a life lost on the border. There's a lot of femicide happening. And then right underneath the dots are all the natural life that kind of grows around there. So these different flowers from the area. And the last piece was the glass horn. So bulls are very powerful, like strong creatures. And the horns can be like really intimidating, but we wanted to still keep the strength, but also give it a sense of fragility. So we incorporated some glass horns, and neither Marilyn or I are glass blowers or glass makers. So we worked with a fabricator at the Tyler School of Art to help us make those horns. Gabriel Marquez, Gabriel, another artist from El Paso, Texas, who I met in Seattle. So we're exactly the same age. We went to the same university, but never overlapped until Seattle, many years later. But Gabriel Gabriel is a muralist and a painter. So Gabriel has a really beautiful style of this kind of very linear quality. It almost looks like it's one continuous line to make up his imagery. And Gabriel hasn't really worked with clay, has made a couple of small things, but he really was interested in like making the piece himself. So this was one of the first pieces that was finished. He came to my studio. Liz, my assistant, and I rolled all these small coils for him, and then Gabriel basically made, we had the form, we made the coils, and then allowed him to play and place and figure out how they would work on this three-dimensional form. And the piece is titled Espíritu del Viento, which is the spirit of the wind. El Paso is a sun city, but it can also be very windy. It's kind of in this valley. So he wanted to make one of the ears tattered and unraveled to give it kind of this fighting spirit, but also like the wind has, bit back a little bit. And then finally, Christy Tirado. Christy is a printmaker out of the Yakima Valley in Washington. And so it's kind of the Central Valley in Washington. There's a lot of orchards, there's a lot of migrant labor that goes on there. So Christy is a woodcut and linoleum cut printmaker. So we thought about the practice of sgraffito, which is basically just like a reductive process anyways, in order to bring images onto the burro. So Christy, we made the form. Christy came to my studio in Seattle I was here in Philadelphia, so my assistant Liz kind of worked with her hand in hand, and Christy spent a few days just like carving away all the images. She has a play with words as well, so this is titled Burro Mezcladero. So typically mezcal, the spirit is made with donkeys or mules, like pulling the wheel to kind of mash up all of the fruit. So that would be a burro mezcalero. But mezcladero, to mezclar means to like mix together. So it's this idea of like mixing, again, a lot of people dealing with identity, being both, having roots in Mexico, but being from the States here in the US. So there's some agave plants, and it kind of plays with that mixing of cultures a little bit. Yeah, so with these three bodies of work here, I'll start with the three calaveras, and we were talking about the eyes of the other ones, and so with these I wanted them to feel very much like skulls. So I removed the eyes so that they feel like otherworldly, like not of this world. Even the one that has the indentations of the eyes, I tried to block them out completely. And I made a series of these vases that were kind of elemental. So it was I believe the three there are air, fire, and water. The earth calavera I haven't made yet, but because it's earth calavera, it'll probably still have like a human, like the eyes will still be there because they're of this time. So I like playing with those elements because they give me different color schemes to work with, different like feelings to make. So I made the calaveras, I made some guardians that are the same type of 4 elements, and I've made some devils that also have the same elements. The Hanuman sculpture back here, I wanted to include because of the Magic Gardens. I had the wonderful opportunity right out of graduate school to travel, so I received this fellowship called the Bonderman Travel Fellowship that took me to about 26 countries in the span of 10 and a half months in 2010. So a long time ago, but it was a year of just like absorption and experiencing other countries, other people. But I went to Thailand, and in Thailand, all of the temples are just like they're like the Magic Gardens in the sense that they're just like so embellished, and and a lot of it is like clay embellishments, these different little tile mosaics, and it's just like overwhelming, but at the same time it's very cohesive and it works together. So after my experience there, I made a Hanuman sculpture just because I always like to kind of research and study that area and figure out like what is from that place. And after the Hanuman sculpture, I made a luchador as my guardian as well. So I made this large luchador head, which is in a private collection at this point. But I thought this was fitting to come to the Magic Gardens because the place kind of reminds me of those temples in Bangkok, Thailand. And then the throne, I made this as an artist in resident at the Tyler School of Art. And this throne is called Trono del Pueblo, or the throne for the people. And I wanted this kind of space where everybody can feel empowered and anybody, can have a turn and just kind of, be in like the boss's chair in some regard. So when I was making this, I set it on 4 heads, and the 4 heads for me are the 4 cardinal directions. So north, east, west, south, just to kind of, spread it out all over the globe, basically. The 2 front faces are comedy and tragedy, to kind of encompass everything that we feel and kind of go through. So it spans many different emotions. It has this kind of central halo, again, this kind of radiant movement to kind of bring everything in towards you, or like make everything kind of go out into the world. So it's this, kind of these rays out. And then in the back, there's an eagle, an ascending eagle with its wings spread out as this kind of like upward mobility and movement out into and beyond this this slide. So a lot of my work deals with like the community and like the people that we're with here, but also thinking about like when we move on and what we leave behind for the people and ourselves. And Isaac Scott, who's a very, very wonderful photographer here in Philadelphia from Madison, Wisconsin, but he lives here in Philly. We took this drone, and it's pretty heavy, but we took it and carted it around, and there's this beautiful gardens just north of like kind of Kensington area, Iglesias Garden, which is wonderful, like community kept garden. So we set the drone up at Iglesias Garden, and that's a photograph that's behind Grace there. So we took kind of a portrait within this community space. And I wish everybody at one point to sit in it. It's trickier here, but it will eventually be for people to just kind of take a turn and sit on. So yeah. That's it. That's a lot of me talking. So thanks everybody.
When did you first come to Philly when you moved here? I'm from originally from East LA. And when I moved to Philly, 13 years ago, totally different. Everything's different.
Yeah.
From the weather to the lifestyle to the composition of people. How did you find it, and how did it influence what you decided to work on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we moved out here fall of 19, and we were living in Seattle right before that. So I lived in Seattle 12 years prior to coming to Philadelphia. And because I lived in Seattle so long, I've seen that city change. Like I've been able to see the change, right, that you're describing, witnessing here in Philadelphia. And I think when we moved, when we moved here, one of the lovely things about Clay is that you kind of have a community of people to kind of to interact with. So Clay is a very small, it's a very niche thing, even though it's becoming more popular. But if you do Clay and you work in Clay, you kind of get to, and you do it long enough. I've been doing it almost 18 years. You get to know a lot of people. So when we first moved here, I mentioned going to the Clay studio in Old City, and one of my friends was giving a lecture the day that we drove in. So we felt like we had a place to go, and we had a kind of this almost like a bubble of a community to go into. I also moved here to be the artist in resident at the Tyler School of Art. So that was another community that I could kind of like place myself into. So it was an easy transition to Philadelphia. One of the things that stuck out with me was how much more diverse Philly was than Seattle. And how much dirtier it is here, and just like how much more like vibration of energy is in Philly. Like people get stuff done here, and they just do it. People just do the thing that they need to do. Whether it's like parking the car in the middle of the street because they gotta go do something, or like putting on a show. They just like people kind of get things done, and that was lovely to experience. And then we had the global pandemic lockdown for pretty much two years that we were here. 1 year that was like that one like really severe year, and then trying to still get to know the city. So I feel like even though we've been here 4 years, we're still slowly getting to know as much as we can.
And one of the first things you made when you got here was rats and pigeon.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. So as a resident at Tyler, I was working with still with the Guardian themes, but being in a more urban environment, I started looking at rats and pigeons a little bit differently. And also, I guess during the lockdown, but looking at these two creatures that were very much made up, gave an aesthetic to the urban environment, but are very mistreated and overlooked, and but they're still very resilient. So I found some comfort in kind of their resiliency to keep going. So I made a 5-foot pigeon and a 5-foot rat as the urban guardian.
And they still sort of reverberate at the new studio building.
At least the rat does, yeah.
Yeah.
So at the new Clay Studio building, which they just moved to North American Street in kind of Kensington, Fishtown area, I led all these community-led tile making events. So people would come in, very similar to the tiles that are in the back of Los Guardias. People would come in, I showed them how to make a tile, and each person personalized their tile. So they wrote their name, added some things, whatever they'd like. And we ended up making about 500 of those tiles. And we, the old Clay Studio has some beautiful Isaiah Zager mosaics, and the new Clay Studio has new construction, so it still doesn't have a lot of that. So we were able to completely tile one of the stairwells.
Oh yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Hey.
It's clicking now.
Good.
Yeah, that's
You're like,
what
where
it
was
is.
it?
It's
Yeah.
in the stairwell. Yeah.
So, because the stairwell was just kind of white and kind of, there's
It's
not
a
a lot
very
of,
blank building.
very blank right now. So we made all those tiles, and then I laid them out and superimposed the Philly skyline with a giant rat, a little bit of garbage thrown in there with the beautiful sunrise in the background. And that's titled A New Dawn John, just because I like to play words.
The thing you're doing at Tyler, is it, so it's a residency, are you teaching there, or?
Yeah, so I'm not at Tyler anymore as an artist in resident, but initially I applied for that position, and what they do is they give you a studio space to work, kind of in the graduate studio area with all the grad students. So I had my private studio, and then I had the opportunity to teach 1 or 2 classes depending on what I wanted, and then access to all of their equipment. So when I first came in, I was in the ceramics program, but I got to know the glass program pretty well, which is how we were able to make those horns. I wanted to get to know printmaking and fibers, because it's just a pretty amazing school. But then with the pandemic lockdown, they kind of that stopped, and you weren't able to go to different programs very easily. I think it's finally picked back up to being a little bit more open. It was a 1-year position, so I was only scheduled to be there through spring of 2020. But I got invited for a 2nd year, and then I think I was doing a good job. Plus the pandemic, I got invited to a 3rd year. So I just finished up August of last year, and then finally setting up a studio in Philadelphia. So finally, almost a year later.
So you're planning on staying here?
At least for I'm signing a 1-year lease, so
Okay.
at least another year. We'll kind of play it year by year. That's what we've been doing with our apartment. We've been in the same place in West Philly for 4 years, and every year when it's time to renew, we're like, what's going on? How we keep doing it. So.
I have more questions, but I don't want to dominate.
Go for it.
So for this Zodiac project, it's such a big idea, and especially wanting to collaborate with artists, which is such a cool idea. I can see having an idea like that and then not knowing where or how to start. So what was the time frame between you coming up with the idea of doing the Zodiac, idea of collaborating with other people, and then actually reaching out to them and then actually starting?
Yeah.
It sounds like a big, it obviously is a big project.
Yeah, it's a good question. I first came up with the idea in 2018 when I made the first Zodiac. So the first one was made in 2018 for the Seattle Art Fair. And those were the 12 animals, but just that, I worked on all 12. I kind of finished all 12, and we showed them at the art fair. And we, and I made molds of just the head without any decoration, so that I know that I could, make the 2nd version and make the 3rd version. So I always had the idea to make 5 different versions, and I knew that I wanted one to be collaborative. I guess in 2020, when I was at home, stuck without a studio, like the university was shut down, I couldn't go into the school. I do have a studio in Seattle, but I couldn't, flying, I couldn't fly. I don't have a house there, so I didn't want to impose on my friends during this lockdown. So I was at home, and Marisol can tell you I was going low, a little stir crazy. We went for a lot of walks, but that's when I thought, okay, well, I have time to sit by my computer and like do all of the administrative work to reach out to artists, compose a letter, tell them about the project, figure out if I have any budget, and in probably June of 2020 is when June or July of 2020 is when I got confirmation from all 12 artists that they wanted to work on this project, and then soon after that we kind of just started, one by one. I was the main contact, but so I was like coordinating with everybody. The Chihuahua with Gabriel, that was made in November of 2020, so that was the first one that was finished. So he just came in, kind of knocked it out in a couple of weeks. And then everybody else, we had set up a show just north of Seattle in Bellingham, Washington. So that was kind of a deadline for everybody. It's like, we have a show ready, you gotta finish this piece, and we're gonna show them. So everybody, they started being finished at different stages, but I would say from the point of contact to the showing, it took about a year to get it all done.
That's not bad.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
I work really fast too.
Yeah.
I'm very impatient. And one of the nicest things for me, so I wanted to make sure that each artist got paid for their time, regardless of what they were doing. So, if Josiman was doing audio and John was coming to Seattle to like physically work, I wanted, or Eric was using his acrylic paint, I wanted everybody to like have some money for any special materials that they needed. So I'd saved a little money from some previous sales, so I wanted, I paid for shipping to and from the artists. I gave them each a stipend for their own materials, and then people that were able to fly to my studio in Seattle, I flew them to Seattle and then paid for an Airbnb or somewhere they could stay. So very quickly it started to like add up, and it's like, oh, I'm spending all this money. But I really wanted the project to be done, right? And then I applied for some different grants, and right before we got right before they went onto the show, I got this second place award for a big grant, which was like 20 grand, which kind of like covered the expenses for this project. So, it's like, I kind of put it in first, and then it eventually ended coming back too, which was nice.
What was your, it's probably hard to answer, but what was your favorite one? Like, you opened and you're like, oh my God, like mind blown.
I mean, well, I would say like probably the peyotera, which is the monkey that's over there, because I came from Mexico and Gabriela was sending me images of like the string. So I was seeing what it was looking like, but to open that and just like see the intricacy of all the detail, it was just like very, very exciting.
Colorful.
So colorful. But it was like every single time there was some that I lived with all the time. So like the eagle, I was around.
Yeah.
It never left my studio, basically. The jaguar didn't really leave my studio, but once we got the gold and to put those in, that changed it a lot, right? But every time I got a new box back, when I saw the blue deer with all the fiber, I was like, holy shit. Every single one was just like phenomenal. It was like a new present every time.
How did you decide to show you this here at Magic Gardens, or was there ever any other place that you would have rather done? Or?
So this is the 4th showing of this series, and like what I want to do is I want to So I thought like this would be a great place for it because I want people, I want people to know my work, but I also like value these artists a lot. So I want people to kind of know them. I feel like this is a pretty diverse city, so I want to engage, different people that come into the space. And that's the reason that I also want it to travel, because I want, like I wish that I could, some of the artists live far, so I want to try and bring it closer to where they live, so they can bring their community, they can bring their families. It'd be great if it was in the Southwest somewhere, like Samira lives in Tucson, a couple people live in El Paso, so if you can go somewhere in Arizona or New Mexico or Western Texas. So I'm also like constantly searching for places that this exhibition can travel to, at least the Zodiac versions. So. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. You already know I love your work because of your show, and I give you all my praise all the time. So well done. Always. I have a question about the engineering behind the throne.
Yeah.
Because people are always asking me, they're like, okay, what else is in this? Because it's all clay. And people are always asking, if there's metal, if there's something, but it is all clay. So can you just talk a little bit about how you engineer these massive clay sculptures?
Yeah. So most of it is only about 3/8 of an inch thick. So it's not very thick clay. It's like pretty thin all the way through. And I've been doing this for a long time, so you get to know the timing of the material, because it all has like a timing. It needs to be wet enough for you to be able to manipulate it and attach things and ornament the surface, but it has to be dry enough for it to support weight, right? So once it's dry enough, like it can support a lot of weight if you distribute the weight in a way. So at first it was just like building large scale was trial and error, and I've never built a throne quite like that, especially with these 4 heads on the bottom. But I started from the bottom up. So I had the 4 heads made, and those are made with a mold, so I can kind of make the initial head. They're the same size, and then I can change the features. Then I just started building up the walls, almost like putting a building together. So inside of the seat, there's cross bracing, because if people were going to sit on it, which I've sat on it, a few other folks have sat on it, that cross bracing supports the weight, and that's all made out of clay. If it was just a one piece of clay over the top, it could hold you for a while, but eventually if it gives, it cracks. So it needs that, almost like a wall framing to kind of help hold it in place. The hardest part about that one was the part that still scares me is the back, kind of because it goes very thin, and then it kind of grows into a larger form. So there's more weight here, supported by kind of a thin area. But there's a hollow space that's not very deep, but it's probably about that wide, that kind of travels through most of the back. If it was just one slab of clay, that can flex and that would snap. So having that hollow space actually reinforces it, so it can't move around. Who taught me that? I don't know, but I was like, I've built a lot of things, so I figured, I've broken a lot of things too. So.
Was that all fired in one piece?
Mostly one piece, except there's a section on the top that's probably, of the top that goes round. So there's a section probably like a foot that's a separate piece, and that's just because it wouldn't fit in the kiln otherwise. Okay. So the kiln that Tyler has, it's 62 inches. So that's the max height that I can build. And then I built the other piece separate, and it's epoxied together and then painted. So hopefully you can. Like if you really look, you can see it, but most people, you won't be able to see it. You should go see it. But those are fun because they're new projects. They're like new engineering feats for myself, the large scale ceramics is horrible. Like not the way to go. It's hard to store, it's heavy, it's fragile. But there's something about, for me, in the completion of a large scale piece that's like very self-rewarding. It's like, oh yeah, I was able to do that, that's great. And it's physical as I'm working, so I'm also not sitting at a table. Usually when I'm doing a lot of painting, because everything's painted by hand, my shoulders start to hurt, my lower back hurts, because I'm just like, you know, I don't know as a painter how you feel, but when I'm building the forms, I feel like I'm moving around a lot. So I get to walk around the piece all the time, up and down steps and ladders, and yeah, and I like that a lot. It's really fun. Any last questions?
I feel like some of these pieces are like kind of like spiritual in a way, just like, and I was wondering like, do you have any like spiritual beliefs or practices that like inform or like ideas at all?
Yeah, I think, you know, I also feel like they're very spiritual pieces, and I think it's because they're very personal pieces to myself and to the specifically to the artists that like we're collaborating. So I think that, you know, through our conversations we were able to kind of put our intentions into the like put all of our intentions into the work, and I feel like they emanate out a little bit. You know, when you put something, like when you're making something with good intentions, it kind of holds that energy. So that's my spirituality, right? Like when I approach things, and I try and you know, make sure that it is carrying some of the emotive qualities that I want other people to feel. So if, you know, if I'm feeling sad and I want the piece to feel sad, like I'm sad as I'm making it, you know, because I'm kind of like thinking about the things that are going into the work. So that's kind of where my spirituality lies. It's like with how I communicate with the artwork, but like how I communicate with people, and it's almost like it's not quite karma, but it's like, you know, you receive what you put out into the world. So, you know, I try and put out good vibes, because I want good vibes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Are you the first generation born in the U.S.?
Yeah, but I have 4 older sisters. So
How did your parents react when you told them, I want to go to school and be an artist?
well,
As an immigrant child.
that's a great question. First, like, so I was the first to finish college, right? And I have 4 older sisters, and they all, you know, some of them started but weren't able to finish. Some of them didn't go to university or college, but I didn't know. I went into school like loving the arts, but not knowing that I was going to be an artist, right? Like I went in trying to get a design degree, like a graphic design degree, because I was like, well, that's the arts, but I can get a job. And then that wasn't, you know, I took an intro to ceramics class. The first time I touched clay was in undergrad, 2004, I think, maybe my sophomore year or junior year of college. I took a ceramics class, just fell in love with it, and then kept taking clay classes as I started to distance myself from design. And then I'm like, well, I can be an art educator. I can like get my art education degree. So I switched my major to that, spend all my time in clay, and then finally decided, okay, I'm just going to be a studio. I'm going to get a degree in studio arts and a BFA in ceramics. And I told my mother, and she was like, finish college. That was pretty much it. She was like, yeah, just finish. As long as you finish. But, you know, she didn't, my family doesn't, like my family doesn't have like higher ed, you know, very, what do you call it? Like blue collar jobs, like very just like, so even just the idea of going to college, I don't know if my mother really knew what you could do. It's just like, you get a job, but there was no real thinking of like, well, with whatever degree. I guess if you go to nursing, it's like, then you'll be a nurse, right? But yeah, there was no pressure, and it was very supportive, which was nice. But I'll tell you that, I got my MFA. I ended up moving to Seattle, got my MFA. I got my first gallery representation and first solo show, which was like huge, right? Like as an artist, you're like, first solo show, it's all about me, everybody look at me. And I told my mother that I had my first solo show, and she's like, oh yeah, congratulations, it's so nice. And then I told her I got my first like part-time teaching job, and she was like, over the moon. She's like, oh my God, that's so great, I love it. Because it's still like this idea of security, where you're like, part-time teaching doesn't pay me anything. I could potentially, make money selling artwork. I've been doing it long enough where she's seeing and we understand. Yeah.
Did you get your master's like right after your bachelor's?
I took 1 year to build up my portfolio, which I stayed on in El Paso. And I worked as a studio tech at the university and kind of had studio access. Like I took a 1 credit independent study just for access, and really supportive undergrad mentor, Vincent Burke. But yeah, 1 year to build up my portfolio and apply to grad school. Applied to 5 different programs. I got into 2 special, like I was offered a post-bac special student at one of them. But University of Washington was one of my first choices. And yeah. And then I later learned that all of the work that I made in that 1 year that I took off, they hated and they liked the work. Yeah, that's what they told me. They're like that other work. Yeah, they liked my like thesis show.
Yeah.
So I got in for like two sculptures and everything else. They were like,
It's cool that they still like zoned in on the 2 that they liked.
I know. Yeah. I do a lot of mentoring now. I'm part of this organization called the Color Network, which is an organization that helps support ceramic artists of color and provides mentorship, provides like different opportunities, different ways to kind of like figure out how to navigate the art world. But we do a lot of, I do a lot of mentorship through that. And I helped some people with their grad school applications, and I'm like, if I was applying with my undergrad portfolio now, like I would not get into school. These like young artists are like amazing.
Yeah.
It's pretty great. So yeah.
How did you choose which, maybe you talked about this at the beginning, but how did you choose which artist went with which animal?
Yeah, so they were each born the year of the animal that they worked on. So when I started by asking my friends first, I started to like fill out different animals. So when I asked my friend group, it's like, well, the eagle is taken, the cabra is taken, and then I kind of like checked those off. And then I started to ask other friends, and they're like, oh, I was born, I would ask with their Chinese zodiac, and then be like, well, and then I would explain the idea behind the Mexican zodiac. But I'm the dog, the Chihuahua. Yeah.
Are the artists all pretty much within one 12-year span, or is there any like intergenerational jam going on?
They're kind of, with my friend group and with some of the recommendations, they're all kind of like within the 12-year. I don't know, I think Gabriela, maybe the peyotera, might be outside of the monkey, might be outside of the 12-year span. Trying to think if Eric 77, Eric Garcia. I'm not sure. There might be a little bit more distance between, it might be a 16-year span or something. Because Moises, they were pretty young artists when they embarked on that project. Yeah. Great.
What's the best clay studio in Philly?
What's the best clay studio?
Yeah.
They all have different things to offer. I don't know. I don't know all the clay studios. The clay studio, with their new building is phenomenal. But it's full all the time. So I feel like there's a lot of community studios, like Fleischer Art Memorial has classes that they do. It's hard because a lot of,
There's
Oh. Black Hound in West Philly. I don't know, I feel like it's hard because clay's becoming really popular, which is great. So there's a bunch of like pop-up studios, but if you ask me about all the clay studios in Seattle, I lived there 12 years, so I can tell you like everybody and their mother who has a clay space. I don't know Philly that well yet. Most places need to run, like in order to have access, you need to take a class. And I think that's really great when you're starting out, but sometimes you just need access without taking a class. And I feel like that's a lot harder to find in a clay studio. So,
Thanks.
are you looking to take a class?
Maybe.
Okay. We can talk more specifically about what kind of, so, because I do a very specific type of clay, but there's pottery, there's
They don't
like
teach
bunch
us
of,
any.
they don't,
They don't teach any like sculptural stuff mostly.
yeah, very, very rarely, so, yeah. Great, thanks everybody, appreciate you.
Thank you.